Ladies and gentlemen,
this is Abe Foxman, the head and face of the Anti-Defamation League.
I have been lucky to have survived by miracle the Shoah.
Very nice.
The ADL is the biggest organization in the world fighting anti-Semitism, with a budget of over $70 million a year. Abe Foxman has become the symbol of the fight against anti-Semitism in the world today. I thought he might be able to open some doors for me. So I asked him to help me out with my film. Abe Foxman was very welcoming. I think he liked the idea of an Israeli filmmaker taking an interest in anti-Semitism. And he agreed to give me unprecedented access to his organization, which has its headquarters in Manhattan.
He's doing a film, which I still don't understand what it is, but we said yes, yes, and yes. And we're on the record.
Got it.
Okay?
I'll be good.
Okay? He's not going to hurt us.
Great.
On the other hand, he's a good journalist, okay?
I'll take
He wants to get, good stuff.
Foxman introduced me to some of the senior staff at the headquarters.
You can talk to him too.
Would you say the ADL is like the biggest Jewish organization dealing with anti-Semitism?
Oh, yes, yes. In the world. Yeah, there's no question about that. Yeah, certainly in the United States, but I would say in the world. We have all of our 27 offices all over the country with their ears to the railroad tracks. It starts with an insult, a denigrating statement, and at the very top, what you have is genocide. And in between is every bad thing that can happen to somebody.
This is my grandmother. She's over 90 years old and she lives in Jerusalem. I decided to tell her about the film I am making.
אני ישראלי, כן? אני אף פעם לא הרגשתי מה זה אנטישמיות. אז אני שואל מה זה בעצם, אני בא ומנסה להבין מה זה.
נו, אז עכשיו אתה יודע מה זה?
אני לומד.
אתה לומד. זו הסבתא שלך יפהפייה, זו אני.
Her family emigrated from Russia in the 19th century because of the strong Zionist ideology. The first Zionists came to Israel, or Palestine as it was then, because they thought it was the only solution to anti-Semitism.
אנחנו ציונים נלהבים. אנחנו לא נחליף את המדינה ולא נחליף את העם בשום פנים ואופן. לכן כשמדברים על דברים כאלה, זה פוגע. זה מרגיז.
איזה דברים?
על יהודים, על אנטישמים, על דברים כאלה.
אבל הם אומרים שיש שם הרבה אנטישמים.
איפה יש שמה? אז למה הם לא באים אם יש אנטישמים? אם יש אנטישמים, למה הם לא באים? עד שיהרגו אותם. מה?
אז למה באמת הם לא באים?
למה הם לא באים? הם אוהבים כסף, יהודי אוהב כסף. יהודי זה רמאי. יהודי זה רמאי. והוא עושה שם כסף, למה לא לבוא פה ולעבוד, אם הוא יכול לעשות שם כסף בלי לעבוד? למה לא?
שם הם לא עובדים?
הם לא עובדים, זה שאני אומרת. שם יש להם כסף בלי לעבוד, פה אם יעבדו, יצטרכו לעבוד.
איך יש להם כסף בלי לעבוד? איך יש להם כסף בלי לעבוד?
איך עשו כסף? ריבית, מלווה בריבית, ובתי מרזח פה, ויין פה, וזה שם. זה הם יודעים, יהודי יודע את הפוילשטיק האלה. יהודי יודע את הפוילשטיק האלה. אני אומרת לך, אני היהודייה האמיתית. לא כסף מסנוור אותי, שום דבר לא.
אבל את מדברת כמו האנטישמים, שאומרים על היהודים שהם לא עובדים והם עושים...
לא, אני לא מדברת. אני אומרת, הם רוצים להיות שם שיפסר להם, עד שאולי יבוא מישהו, היטלר אחר ויהרוג אותם, יברחו. מה?
I want to ask you a question. Look over here. Do you see a Holocaust coming? It's crazy. There's so much hunger, so much starvation in the world. So many people are suffering. And you want me to get excited about some idiot painting a swastika somewhere?
Finkelstein lost his job at the university because of what he claims was pressure from the Israeli lobby. Then he was denied entry to Israel because he was, as the authorities described, a security hazard. which being Jewish himself is probably unprecedented. Finkelstein reminds me of the biblical prophets of doom, who were always being pelted with stones for saying things nobody wanted to hear.
One of the major kind of claims I hear from people like the ADL or other Jewish people is that, like, how come always people picking up on Israel? How come there is so much injustice in other parts of the world and nobody speaks about? What is the reason
I
for
think
that?
people listen. I open the radio. I hear non-stop about Sudan. I hear non-stop about Tibet. I hear non-stop about Darfur. I hear a lot. The only place I hear excuses made for is Israel. That's the place where I hear excuses. And we do have to remember, it is the oldest occupation in the world. I mean, 40 years really is enough. It's older than you. It's older than you, the occupation. Doesn't that kind of stun you? The irony is that the Nazi Holocaust has now become the main ideological weapon for launching wars of aggression. Every time you want to launch a war of aggression, drag in the Nazi Holocaust. It's the suffering then used as another pretext or excuse to humiliate, degrade, and torture the Palestinians. That's the problem. The suffering comes as a package. It then comes, here is the suffering, now we blow up your house. Here is the suffering, now we take your land. Here is the suffering, now we drop artillery shell or shoot artillery shells at your villages. It's a package deal with Israel and its American supporters. It's not just suffering. It's suffering which is then wrapped in a club. And the club is then used to break the skulls of the Palestinians. That's the problem. It's not being used to educate people. It's not being used to enlighten people. It's not being used to make people more moral.
It can be.
But it's not.
I mean,
it's not. That's the whole point. Of course it can be, but it isn't. It's the best thing that will ever happen to Israel if they get rid of these American Jews who are warmongers from Martha's Vineyard. And they're warmongers from the Hamptons. And they're warmongers from Beverly Hills. And they're warmongers from Miami. It's been a disaster for Israel. It's the best thing if they can ever get rid of this American Jewry. It's a curse.
For Finkelstein, Foxman is the main enemy.
you see, that's why you're not going to get people's attention, things like that.
Some people laugh.
You comparing Foxman to Hitler, that's kind of...
It's an insult to Hitler. Hitler at least didn't do it for money.